The human Marines sat in their briefing room, unaware of the monumental event about to unfold. It was just another routine day until the message arrived, a strange transmission that echoed across their communication system. It wasn't like anything they had encountered before. It was a formal invitation, yet its contents were cryptic, almost alien. "Who's sending this?" Captain Blake asked, leaning closer to the screen. He ran a hand through his hair, his face filled with confusion. The message was short and to the point. "You are invited to take part in the trials of the Corinth. Only the strongest survive. Do you dare to accept?" The name Corinth meant nothing to them. It wasn't a species they had ever heard of, and yet the tone of the message left an unsettling feeling in the air. Despite the mystery, Blake felt the pull of curiosity. He was a man of action, and he had never backed down from a challenge. "What do you think, Sergeant?" Captain Blake asked, looking at his second-in-command, Sergeant Ramirez. Ramirez was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the type who believed in getting things done. Ramirez stood up, scanning the message again. "We don't know what we're up against. It could be a trap, but it could also be a chance to prove ourselves." The room fell silent for a moment as everyone absorbed what had just been said. The Marines were trained to face impossible odds, but this was something different. No one knew who the Corinth were, but one thing was clear. They were powerful. And if they were inviting humanity to their trials, it could mean an opportunity for Earth to make its mark in the universe. "We need more information," said Blake, his voice steady, but his mind racing. "But if this is legit, we're going in. I don't care what we face. If the Corinth think they can challenge us, they'll find out just what humanity is capable of." With that, the decision was made. The Marines would participate, and they would face whatever tests the Corinth had set out for them. No matter how impossible or dangerous it seemed, they were ready. As the message ended, another screen flickered on. A map of the galaxy appeared, highlighting a distant star system, the Corinth's homeworld. "Prepare yourselves," Captain Blake said, his voice firm. "This is more than just a mission. It's a statement. Humanity doesn't back down. We rise to the challenge." The Marines gathered their gear, the room buzzing with excitement and tension. They didn't know what lay ahead, but they were soldiers, and they had one thing in their favor: the human spirit. Whether this was a test of strength, intelligence, or something else entirely, the Marines knew they would give everything they had. The journey to the Corinth homeworld had begun. The human Marines stood on the alien planet, looking around at the barren landscape. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The sky was an unusual shade of violet, and the ground beneath their boots was a mix of hard rock and deep cracks, like a world scarred by ancient battles. The air was thin, and the temperature was already starting to drop, sending a chill through their bones. "This is it, men," Captain Blake said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in the air. "The Corinth have set up their tests, and we're going to show them what we're made of." Sergeant Ramirez glanced around. "Looks like we're not alone. I'm guessing those alien soldiers are here to watch us fail." The Corinth, who were watching from a distance, didn't look like the friendly type. They stood tall and imposing, their eyes sharp and calculating. No doubt, they had witnessed many groups of hopeful warriors from other species come and go, all of them failing in the tests. But the Marines were different. They were used to impossible situations, to pushing their bodies to the limit. This first test was about endurance, staying alive in this harsh alien world for 72 hours without any supplies. No food, no water, just the raw power of human will. "You'll be tested, human." The Corinth leader's voice boomed, a deep, echoing sound that sent a shiver down Blake's spine. "Survive, or fail." With that, the test began. The Marines were left alone, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and their training to guide them. The temperature continued to drop, and the wind picked up, making it even harder to keep moving. The landscape stretched for miles in every direction, and there were no signs of civilization. just endless terrain and harsh conditions. Captain Blake led the way, setting a fast pace. He knew that every step was critical. The Corinth were watching, judging their every move. The Marines had to prove that they could endure, that they could survive when the odds were against them. Hours passed. The cold was unbearable, and the thin air made it harder to breathe. Every step felt like a struggle, but the Marines kept pushing forward. They moved together, helping each other when one of them stumbled or lagged behind. "Don't stop," Captain Blake said, his voice strong. "We're in this together. We keep going, no matter what." As the hours turned into a full day, the Marines began to feel the effects of the cold. They were exhausted, their bodies pushed to the limit, but their resolve was unshaken. Sergeant Ramirez looked back at the group. They were tired, but they weren't giving up. "We can do this," Ramirez said, determination in his eyes. "Just keep moving. Just keep going." Nightfall came, and the temperature dropped even further. The Marines huddled together for warmth, trying to keep each other alive in the freezing cold. But despite the harsh conditions, they held their ground. They didn't stop. They didn't quit. By the time the 72 hours were up, the Marines had made it. They had endured the impossible. When they finally returned to the Corinth's testing area, the alien soldiers were silent, staring at them in disbelief. The humans had survived the harshest conditions they had ever set up, and the Corinth weren't sure what to make of it. The Marines had passed the first test, but they knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge had only just begun. The Marines had barely recovered from the brutal endurance test when they found themselves standing in front of a massive alien structure. The Corinth soldiers, still watching with their cold, calculating eyes, didn't speak as they motioned for the Marines to enter. Inside, the walls were smooth and metallic, glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. It was like walking into the heart of an alien city, a place where everything felt foreign and dangerous. Captain Blake studied the environment. There was no sign of any immediate threat, but he knew better than to trust appearances. The Corinth had designed this test to push their mental strength, to test their ability to think on their feet. This time, it wasn't about surviving harsh conditions. It was about strategy. The challenge was simple, or so it seemed. The Marines had to lead an assault on a highly fortified alien position. They had no weapons, no reinforcements, and no clear map of the terrain. Just a series of holographic displays showing the alien base, complete with turrets, traps, and thousands of enemy soldiers. The air in the room grew tense as Blake examined the data. The Corinth had set up a perfect trap, one where brute force would not work. This was a test of brains, not brawn. "All right, everyone," Blake said, rallying his team. "We're not going to charge in blindly. We need a plan. Sergeant Ramirez, you're in charge of reconnaissance. I want you to identify weak spots in their defenses." Ramirez nodded. He had always been quick on his feet, thinking through problems before they even started. "Got it, Captain. I'll take a closer look at the enemy position. We need to be smart about this." While Ramirez moved to study the holographic battlefield, Blake turned to the rest of the team. "The rest of you, we'll work on setting up distractions. If we can pull their attention away from the weak spots, we'll have a better chance of getting in." The team quickly spread out, each Marine focusing on a different aspect of the enemy base. They didn't have the advantage of numbers or firepower, but they did have something more valuable: each other. Their communication was flawless, every Marine understanding their role and executing it with precision. Ramirez soon returned with valuable intel. He had found a hidden underground tunnel that led directly to the heart of the enemy's base. It wasn't well guarded, and the turrets above seemed to be distracted by an incoming wave of enemy reinforcements. It was the perfect time to strike. "Okay, here's the plan," Blake said, his voice calm but determined. "We'll use the tunnel. It's our best shot. Sergeant Ramirez, lead the way. The rest of us will follow. We'll disable the turrets from the inside, and create a diversion at the outer perimeter. The Marines moved swiftly and silently, crawling through the tunnel and emerging inside the enemy's base. They disabled the turrets, one by one, using the quiet tools they had been given. The enemy never knew what hit them. The distraction outside kept the majority of the soldiers occupied, and the Marines made their way deeper into the compound. It wasn't long before they reached the central control room. There, they planted a series of explosive charges and made their escape. The alien base erupted in chaos, the Corinth soldiers watching in silence from their observation posts. As the Marines regrouped outside, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had done it. They had outsmarted the most advanced military in the galaxy. They had proven that human ingenuity and teamwork could accomplish the impossible. The Corinth soldiers remained quiet, but their eyes spoke volumes. They had never expected the humans to succeed in this test. And yet, the Marines had passed again. After completing the endurance and strategy tests, the Marines were starting to feel the weight of the challenge. But there was no time to rest. The next test was one that no soldier could afford to underestimate: combat. The Marines were escorted to a large arena, its walls made of an alien metal that shimmered under the strange light of the alien world. The ground was a mixture of sand and strange, glowing rocks that seemed to pulse with energy. The Corinth soldiers watched from high above in the bleachers, their expressions unreadable. They had seen many groups fail in this test, and now it was the Marines' turn. "Prepare yourselves," Captain Blake said, his voice low but steady. "This will be the hardest fight we've faced yet. But we're Marines. We don't back down." Sergeant Ramirez, standing beside him, gave a nod. "We've got this, sir. We've trained for moments like these." Before the Marines could get into position, the ground beneath them shook. A loud roar echoed through the arena, and out from the shadows stepped a massive alien beast. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, towering over 10 feet tall, with thick, armored skin and claws that could tear through metal. Its eyes burned with a menacing glow, and it growled as it spotted its prey. The alien beast let out another roar, charging at the Marines with terrifying speed. "Stay focused," Blake shouted, drawing his weapon. "We fight together." The Marines quickly formed a tight defensive circle, their weapons ready. They had no choice but to face the creature head-on. The beast's sheer size and strength were intimidating, but the Marines had been through worse. The creature swung its massive claws, aiming for the Marines, but they ducked and dodged with precision. "Move. Keep it distracted," Blake ordered, using hand signals to coordinate the attack. The Marines began to work as a team. Sergeant Ramirez flanked the creature, drawing its attention while the others worked to create openings. Lance Corporal Daniels fired his plasma rifle, hitting the beast's legs. It roared in pain but didn't slow down. Private Jenkins hurled a grenade at the creature's back, causing a massive explosion that momentarily stunned it. But the beast was far from finished. It turned around with a deadly snarl, slamming its tail into the ground, sending shockwaves through the arena. The Marines were knocked back, their bodies hitting the hard ground. Captain Blake wasn't about to let the beast win. He quickly regained his footing, signaling for the Marines to regroup. "Get back in formation. We take this thing down together." The Marines responded immediately, rallying to Blake's command. Ramirez moved in again, distracting the creature long enough for Corporal Turner to get a clean shot at its underbelly. The plasma rounds pierced the beast's tough armor, but it was still standing. "We need to hit it harder," Blake yelled. With quick thinking, the Marines created a diversion, using their grenades and weapons to keep the creature off balance. As it turned its attention to Sergeant Ramirez, Captain Blake and the others seized the opportunity. Blake aimed his weapon at the creature's vulnerable spots and fired. The blast struck the beast's head, knocking it to the ground with a final, thunderous roar. It twitched for a moment before collapsing, defeated. The Marines stood panting, their bodies bruised and battered but victorious. They had faced a creature that was far beyond anything they had ever fought before, but they had done it. They had worked together, fought together, and won. The Corinth soldiers, who had remained silent throughout the battle, now looked at the humans with a new level of respect. The Marines had not only survived, they had proven themselves capable of taking down the most terrifying opponent the Corinth could throw at them. Blake looked at his team, a proud smile spreading across his face. "That's how we do it, Marines. We fight, and we win." After the grueling combat test, the Marines felt a brief sense of relief. They had proven their strength, their strategy, and their courage. But there was no time to celebrate. The Corinth soldiers, silent and calculating, moved them to the next stage of the trials. The next test wasn't one of physical strength or combat skill. It was something far more insidious. The Marines found themselves in a dark, enclosed room, the walls made of cold alien metal. There were no windows, no doors. The only source of light came from a series of strange symbols glowing faintly on the walls. The Corinth soldiers stood in the background, watching intently, but said nothing. The silence was unnerving. Captain Blake surveyed the room. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Before anyone could answer, a voice boomed out from the darkness. It wasn't a physical voice. It was inside their minds. "Welcome to the fourth test. Here, you will face your greatest fears. Only the strongest will survive." A cold shiver ran down Blake's spine. He had fought alien beasts, navigated harsh environments, and outsmarted opponents. But this was something different. This test would challenge their minds, their spirits, and their very sense of reality. The Marines stood in formation, their hands gripping their weapons, unsure of what to expect. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The walls closed in, and strange images began to flicker on the walls. Their minds were under attack. For Captain Blake, it began with a flash of memory. His younger brother, who had been taken in battle years ago. He remembered the pain, the helplessness, and the guilt. "You could have saved him," a voice whispered in his ear. "You failed him." Blake clenched his fists, forcing the memory away. It wasn't real. He had to focus, but the illusions wouldn't stop. He could hear the voice again, louder this time, echoing in his mind. Meanwhile, Sergeant Ramirez was fighting his own demons. The walls around him morphed into scenes from his childhood, his home, his family, everything he held dear. But then, it twisted into something horrific. His family was being torn apart by alien invaders, and he was helpless to stop it. "You're not strong enough to protect them," the voice taunted. "You'll always be weak." The Marines, one by one, were confronted with their worst fears, their deepest regrets. The Corinth were using advanced psychological techniques to break them down, to make them question their worth, their abilities, and their resolve. But Blake wasn't going to give up. He had been through too much. He had led his men through impossible odds, and this test would not break him. He closed his eyes, focused, and reached out to his team. "Stay strong," he said, his voice clear and firm. "Don't let it control you. We're Marines. We're stronger than this." The others, hearing Blake's voice, found the strength to fight back. Ramirez forced the images of his family to fade. Lance Corporal Daniels, who had been struggling with feelings of doubt, steadied his breath and remembered his training. Private Jenkins, whose mind had been clouded by fear, found clarity in the unity of the group. Together, the Marines fought the psychological assault. They focused on each other, on their bond as a team. And slowly the illusions began to fade. The walls stopped closing in, and the voices grew quieter. The room returned to its eerie silence, and the Marines were left standing, shaken but unbroken. The Corinth soldiers remained silent, but there was no mistaking the look in their eyes. The humans had passed the test. They had faced their fears and emerged stronger. Captain Blake looked at his team, a small smile creeping onto his face. "That was just their first trick. But we're still standing. We'll face whatever comes next, together. The Marines were tired, their minds and bodies pushed to the limit. They had survived the endurance test, outsmarted the Corinth in combat, and faced their deepest fears in the psychological trial. But now, they were about to face the most difficult test of all: survival. The alien world they were on was harsh, a planet where everything seemed to want to kill you. The air was thin, the temperature unpredictable, and the ground was covered with dangerous creatures and toxic plants. There were no supplies, no food, and no water. They had only their training and each other to rely on. Captain Blake stood at the edge of the barren wasteland, surveying the area. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. It was quiet, too quiet. He could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on them. "This is it," Blake said, turning to his team. "We're going to need to use everything we've got to survive out here. Stay together, stay focused. Don't take any unnecessary risks." Sergeant Ramirez nodded. "We've been through worse. We'll make it." The Marines moved out, sticking close to each other as they navigated the rough terrain. They needed to find food, water, and shelter as quickly as possible. The temperature was already starting to drop, and if they didn't find cover soon, they'd freeze. As they traveled, the Marines kept their eyes open for anything that could be used to their advantage. Private Jenkins spotted some small alien plants that looked like they could be eaten. He cautiously tested them before offering them to the group. Thankfully, they were safe to eat, providing them with much-needed nourishment. But food wasn't enough. They needed water. They searched for hours, but the landscape offered nothing. There was no sign of rivers, lakes, or even streams. The only thing that kept them moving was their resolve not to fail this test. After what felt like days, they finally found something: a small rocky outcrop with a shallow pool of water. It was dirty, and the water had a strange green tint to it, but it was the only source they had. They filled their canteens and drank quickly, desperate for hydration. But just as they began to relax, a low growl echoed through the air. The ground shook beneath them as a massive alien creature emerged from the shadows. It was huge, with jagged scales and glowing eyes. It looked hungry, and the Marines were in its territory. "Defensive positions," Captain Blake shouted. "Form up." The Marines immediately fell into a defensive formation, weapons ready. They didn't know if the creature was hostile, but they couldn't take any chances. The beast lunged toward them with terrifying speed, its claws slashing the air. Lance Corporal Daniels fired first, hitting the creature's side with a blast from his plasma rifle. The creature howled in pain but didn't retreat. It swiped at Daniels, sending him crashing into the rocks. The rest of the Marines fought back, using everything they had to keep the creature at bay. It was a long and brutal battle, but the Marines didn't give up. Together, they slowly wore the creature down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Captain Blake delivered the final blow, piercing the creature's heart with a well-aimed shot. The Marines were exhausted but victorious. They had survived the wilderness, fought off a deadly predator, and proven that they could endure anything. As they gathered around the fallen creature, catching their breath, Sergeant Ramirez looked at Blake with a grin. "I told you we'd make it." Blake smiled back, though he knew they were far from done. "Yeah, but we're not done yet. We've got one more test ahead of us." The Marines had survived, but the final challenge still loomed on the horizon. After surviving the wilderness and defeating the alien creature, the Marines were exhausted but still standing. The Corinth soldiers had pushed them to their limits, but they had proven themselves at every turn. Now, the final test before the ultimate challenge had arrived. Tactical leadership. The Marines were led to a new area, a massive training field that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the center of the field stood a large, heavily guarded fortress, surrounded by a network of trenches and barriers. It looked like a battlefield, an obstacle course designed to test the Marines' leadership and tactical skills. Captain Blake stood tall as he looked over the scene. All right, men. This is the test of our leadership. We're going to split into two teams. One will lead the assault, the other will provide cover and support. We need to take that fortress, but we have to do it with strategy, not just strength. Sergeant Ramirez stepped forward, eager for the challenge. We've faced worse. We'll do this the same way we always do, by working together. The Marines were split into two groups. Blake would lead one team, and Ramirez would lead the other. The rest of the team was scattered between them. The task was clear: take the fortress, but each leader had to come up with a plan. Blake quickly analyzed the enemy defenses. The fortress was well protected, with armed alien soldiers patrolling the walls. There were turrets in place, along with traps set along the path to the gates. It was a tough position, but nothing they couldn't handle. Ramirez, Blake said, pointing to his second-in-command. You're in charge of providing cover. Use the high ground to your advantage, and keep the enemy distracted. We'll go for the gates. Got it, sir, Ramirez replied. With the plan set, Blake's team moved forward. They moved carefully, sticking to the shadows as they approached the fortress. They knew the enemy soldiers were watching, so they couldn't afford to be seen. Keep your heads down, Blake ordered, his voice calm. We make our move when the time is right. Meanwhile, Ramirez's team took up positions on the high ground, ready to create a diversion. Private Jenkins set up a makeshift sniper nest, while Lance Corporal Daniels prepared explosives to disable the enemy's turrets. The tension in the air was thick. The Marines moved with precision, every step calculated. Blake and his team reached the fortress gates, crouching low behind the walls, waiting for Ramirez's signal. "Ready?" Blake whispered. "Ready," replied Ramirez, his voice crackling through the comms. "I'm about to give them something to look at." With a flash of light, the explosives detonated, creating a massive distraction. The enemy soldiers turned to face the explosion, giving Blake's team the opening they needed. They rushed forward, charging at the gates with all their might. The enemy wasn't ready for such an organized assault. The Marines pushed through, taking down enemy soldiers with careful shots and precise movements. They breached the gates and secured the inner courtyard. As the battle raged on, Ramirez's team continued to provide support, picking off stragglers and keeping the enemy from regrouping. In the end, the Marines succeeded. They had taken the fortress, using strategy and teamwork to overcome the odds. Blake looked around at his team, pride swelling in his chest. "We did it," he said, breathing heavily. "You've proven yourselves once again. This test is over." The Corinth soldiers, watching from above, didn't speak, but their expressions told the story. The humans had done what many thought impossible. They had led with precision, showing that their strength wasn't just in their bodies, but in their minds, their unity, and their leadership. Blake looked at his team, a grin spreading across his face. "We've got one more to go. But no matter what happens next, you've all earned my respect." The Marines stood at the edge of the battlefield, their bodies bruised and tired, but their resolve stronger than ever. They had passed every trial the Corinth had thrown at them. Endurance, strategy, combat, fear, survival, and leadership. Each test had pushed them to their limits. Now, the final test awaited. The Corinth soldiers, who had been silent observers until now, finally spoke. "This is the final trial," the lead Corinth said, his voice cold and emotionless. "You will face an enemy unlike any you've encountered before. If you fail, you will not survive." The Marines didn't flinch. They had been through too much to be intimidated now. "Understood," Captain Blake said, his voice steady. "We're ready." The Corinth stepped aside, revealing a large, dark arena in the distance. It was unlike the previous trials, a massive open area, surrounded by tall walls. There was no hiding, no running. The Marines would face their challenge head-on. They moved toward the arena, the air tense with anticipation. The sky above had darkened, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. As they entered the arena, the ground beneath them rumbled, and the gates behind them slammed shut. There was no turning back. The Marines spread out, taking their positions. Blake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This was the ultimate test, not just for them, but for humanity itself. The Corinth had watched them closely, testing their physical, mental, and tactical abilities. Now they would face a challenge that would determine if they were truly worthy. Without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows of the arena. It was massive, towering over the Marines, its eyes glowing with a dangerous, fiery intensity. The creature was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its skin was armored, its claws like blades, and its roar shook the air. It was a beast. No, a monster. And it was unlike anything the Marines had ever fought. The creature charged at them with incredible speed, its claws swiping through the air. Blake didn't hesitate. "Formation. Defend," he ordered. The Marines quickly regrouped, using their weapons to keep the creature at bay. Sergeant Ramirez fired first, hitting the creature's chest with a plasma round. It screeched in pain but didn't slow down. The creature was relentless, its attacks swift and deadly. The Marines fought back with everything they had. Lance Corporal Daniels aimed for the creature's legs, hoping to slow it down. Private Jenkins provided cover, picking off smaller threats that tried to flank them. But the creature was strong, too strong for them to overpower with firepower alone. Blake realized they needed a different approach. "We need to outsmart it," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Ramirez, get its attention. Daniels, you take the high ground. Jenkins, cover them." The plan was set. Ramirez charged at the creature, drawing its focus. The beast lunged at him, but Blake saw his opening. He motioned for Daniels to take the shot. From above, Daniels fired a powerful shot directly at the creature's weak spot, the eyes. The creature roared in pain, momentarily blinded and disoriented. Blake and the rest of the team moved in, attacking with precision. It was their moment. Together, they fought with everything they had, pushing past their fatigue, using their tactics and teamwork to bring the creature down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the creature fell. The Marines stood, panting and covered in sweat, victorious but exhausted. The Corinth soldiers, who had been watching from the sidelines, were silent for a long time. Then, the lead Corinth stepped forward. "You have passed the final test," he said, his voice filled with a strange respect. "The humans have proven themselves. We underestimated you." Captain Blake looked at his team, his heart swelling with pride. "We didn't just pass the tests. We earned our place here. Together." The Marines had done it. They had conquered every challenge the Corinth had thrown at them. They had proven that humanity was not to be underestimated, and they had earned the respect of the galaxy's most powerful warriors. Blake turned to his team, a grin spreading across his face. "Now, let's show them what humanity is really capable of." The air was thick with the smoke of battle as the Marines stood in the arena, their bodies exhausted but their spirits unbroken. The creature lay motionless on the ground, defeated by the very humans who had been underestimated from the start. The Corinth soldiers watched in silence, their eyes narrowing as they observed the Marines' triumph. Captain Blake, his uniform torn and bloodied, took a deep breath. His team had fought hard to get here, and they had passed every test. But there was no time to savor the victory. They still had to face the consequences of their actions, and the Corinth were not known for showing mercy. Blake turned to his team, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "We did it. We proved ourselves to the Corinth. But now we have to see if they'll keep their word." Sergeant Ramirez, still panting from the battle, gave a nod. "We showed them we're more than capable. We'll get through this, Captain." The Marines slowly began to regroup, making sure everyone was accounted for, and no one was seriously injured. Their weapons were still in hand, their minds sharp. They had come this far, and they wouldn't let anything stop them now. The Corinth leader finally stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Blake and his team. There was no smile, no applause, just a cold, calculating look. "You have proven yourselves, humans," he said. "You have passed every trial we set before you. Your strength, strategy, and determination are impressive." Blake stood tall, meeting the Corinth leader's gaze. "We didn't just survive your tests. We earned our place here. We've shown that humans are not to be underestimated." The Corinth leader nodded slowly. "We thought your species was weak, but we have learned that humans are not easily broken. Your people have earned our respect." There was a long pause before the Corinth leader continued. "You will be granted an alliance with our people. Your victory will not be forgotten." The Marines exchanged looks of disbelief. An alliance. After everything they had been through, this was the moment they had been waiting for. It was a victory not just for them, but for all of humanity. They had proven that humans could stand tall among the stars, that they could overcome the impossible. "Thank you," Blake said, his voice filled with pride. "We've earned this, and we'll honor it." The Corinth leader gave a slight nod. "Your victory will echo through the galaxy. You have earned your place in this universe." As the Marines made their way back to their ship, their bodies sore and their minds racing with the weight of what had just happened, Blake couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had faced the toughest challenges, pushed beyond their limits, and emerged victorious. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a victory for humanity. They had shown the galaxy that humans were capable of more than anyone had ever imagined. As the ship's engines roared to life, Blake looked out the window at the vastness of space, knowing that this was just the beginning. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, and there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. The future was theirs. The ship soared through the stars, its engines humming steadily as the Marines leaned back in their seats, finally able to relax. They had completed the impossible. They had passed every trial the Corinth had set before them. And now they were heading home, carrying with them the honor of an alliance with one of the most powerful races in the galaxy. Captain Blake sat at the front of the ship, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse of space outside the window. His mind kept replaying the battles, the moments of tension, and the triumphs that had led them here. They had been pushed to the edge, but they had never given up. They had proven themselves not just as soldiers, but as human beings capable of greatness. Sergeant Ramirez walked up to Blake, a grin on his face. "I still can't believe it, Captain. We actually did it. The Corinth, they respected us." Blake turned to him, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We earned that respect." But it wasn't just about winning. It was about showing them that humanity doesn't back down, that we fight for what we believe in. Ramirez nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "It's hard to believe that the same people who thought we were weak are now going to call us allies." Blake stood up and walked over to the rest of the team, who were gathered around the control panel, still processing everything that had happened. The quiet, reflective mood had settled over the crew. They had all been through so much together, and now they were a part of something far bigger than themselves. "I'm proud of every one of you," Blake said, looking at each Marine. "We didn't just survive those tests. We became something more. We proved that humanity can stand toe-to-toe with the strongest, smartest, and fiercest beings in the galaxy." Lance Corporal Daniels, usually quiet, spoke up. "I'll admit I wasn't sure we'd make it, but we stuck together. That's what got us through." Private Jenkins, with a grin, added, "Yeah, I think I'll be telling my kids about this one day." Blake chuckled, the weight of the mission finally lifting from his shoulders. "We'll have plenty of stories to tell, but for now, let's focus on what's next." "Next?" Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Blake walked toward the window again, his gaze drawn to the stars ahead. "This victory isn't just about us. It's about the future, about opening doors for humanity. The Corinth were the first, but they won't be the last. This is just the beginning. The ship sped through space, the lights of distant stars passing them by like streaks of fire in the sky. They had earned the respect of the galaxy's most powerful race, but Blake knew this wasn't the end of their journey. It was only the start of something much larger. The Marines had shown the galaxy that humans weren't just survivors, they were conquerors, innovators, and warriors. As the ship continued its course back home, the crew remained in silence, each of them thinking about the future that now awaited them. They had proven themselves, and the universe had taken notice. Humanity had arrived, and the universe would never be the same again.